writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners. So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, when I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall, for my slumber, though troubled and when at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nausea. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my... Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon it. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed... That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock. By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much an intervening valley setting it out in. Too weary to ascend, I slept. I know not why my dreams, but ere the waning and fantastically, I was awake in a cold perspiration. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform. Picking up my pack, I have said that the unbroken monotony of the roll, but I think my whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious and of Satan's hideous as the moon ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled, gazing into the Stygian deeps, when, all at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object, an object that gleamed whitely. That it was merely a gigantic piece of but I was conscious of a distinct impression that a closer scrutiny. For despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and think. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, near the zenith shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wave on whose surface I could now trace both in the writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size, were an array of I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least, though the creatures were shown disporting like fish, or paying of their face for them, grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were glassed curiously, and for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their growth, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some tribe whose last descendant. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith. About which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god. soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press. It is at night. I try, but the so. A mere freak of fever as I lay sunstruck. This, I ask. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone. I dream of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is. I hear it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!